You're 100 feet underground. No light, not dim light, none. The kind of dark where your eyes give up trying and start inventing colors just to have something to do. You've been crawling and squeezing through cold, wet stone for the better part of an hour, and the air smells like rock and river and something older than both. And then someone up ahead lifts a hollowed bird bone to their lips and blows. And the sound doesn't just play, it swells. It comes off the curved walls from 3 directions at once, folds over itself, hangs in the air a beat longer than it should. 1 note, and the whole chamber is suddenly full of it, alive with it. 40,000 years before anyone builds a cathedral to get this exact effect on purpose, someone has already found the room that does it for free. No architect, no budget, just the right cave and a good pair of lungs. That's not a guess, by the way. We have the bone. The strange part is this. We can hold that flute. It's real. It's sitting in a museum in Germany. You could go stand in front of the glass and look at it. What we can't do, what nobody can do, is dig up the thing that actually matters, which is the music itself. You can excavate an instrument. You cannot excavate a song. Archaeology is very good at bones and stones, and very, very bad at anything made of air. So a question that sounds simple turns out to be almost impossible. When did humans start making music? When did this actually begin? Because that flute, as old as it is, isn't the beginning. The flute is just the first piece of the beginning that happened to be hard enough to survive. You've probably absorbed a version of the answer already, even if you never went looking for it. It's the tidy one. The oldest known musical instrument is a flute carved from a vulture's wing bone, about 40,000 years old, found in a cave in southern Germany. Case closed. Music is 40,000 years old. It's the kind of clean fact that shows up in a listicle and nobody stops to question, because why would you? And it's true. That flute is real. Nicholas Conrad and his team at the University of Tübingen pulled it out of Hohlefels cave in 2008. 12 fragments of a griffon vulture's forearm, reassembled into an instrument about the length of your hand, with 5 finger holes drilled in careful, deliberate spacing, and a notched mouthpiece shaped to control the breath. 40,000 years. That's older than the worst cold snap of the last ice age, and it beats the arrival of the first modern humans in that part of Europe by a comfortable margin. As far as physical objects go, it is the oldest confirmed instrument on Earth. Here's the crack in it. That flute is really, really good. I don't mean good for its age. I mean, the finger holes sit exactly where someone who understands pitch would put them. The mouthpiece is shaped by hands that have clearly done this before. And a short distance away, in a neighboring cave, Conrad's team found another flute from around the same era carved out of solid mammoth ivory. And ivory isn't hollow. Making that one meant splitting a curved tusk lengthwise, hollowing out both halves by hand, and gluing them back together along a seam airtight enough to hold a note. That is not somebody's first idea. That is somebody's 100th idea. You don't arrive at a Stradivarius without 1,000 worse violins piled up behind it. The moment you really look at these flutes, they stop being the start of the story and turn into a photograph snapped somewhere in the middle of it. Which means the beginning is further back, somewhere the shovels can't reach. So, if it isn't the flute, where is it? It's inside your throat. Right now. The first instrument was never bone, or ivory, or anything you could pull out of the ground. The first instrument was the body, the voice, the breath, 2 hands, and a flat surface, feet stamping packed earth. Music didn't sit around waiting for someone to invent the flute any more than running waited for someone to invent shoes. The instrument came standard. And that equipment is old. Older than the flutes by a long stretch. Old enough that it shows up in a kind of human that wasn't us. There's a small horseshoe-shaped bone in your neck called the hyoid. It floats under your jaw, anchors your tongue, and it happens to be the one and only piece of your entire vocal apparatus that can survive as a fossil. Everything else is soft tissue that rots away to nothing. In 1989, in Kabara Cave in what's now Israel, a researcher named Baruch Ahrensberg found one. A hyoid bone, roughly 60,000 years old, belonging to a Neanderthal. And it was nearly identical to yours. Let that sit for a second. A different species of human, a cousin, gone now, was walking around 60,000 years ago carrying the exact anatomy your throat uses to sing. That's older than nearly every cave painting we've ever found, and 20,000 years before anyone carved that vulture bone flute. The hardware for song was already installed in someone who wasn't even us. Music might not be a human invention at all. It might be something we inherited. Start with what the flutes are actually telling us, because it isn't what the tidy version claims. Konrad has spent decades in these caves in southern Germany, and the thing he keeps coming back to is that there's no clumsy prototype anywhere in the record. The oldest flutes we have are already excellent. When a tradition's earliest surviving example is this refined, that example isn't the origin. It's evidence the origin came earlier and was made of stuff that didn't last. And it isn't only the flutes. That same vulture bone instrument came out of the same layer of dirt as the Venus of Whole Fells, the oldest known sculpture of a human figure anyone has ever found. So the oldest music and the oldest figurative art surface together, out of the same ground, both already fully formed. Nobody's easing into this. Think about the ivory flute one more time. Somebody looked at a mammoth tusk, a solid, curved, brutally hard chunk of material, and thought, I can turn this into a wind instrument, and then spent days doing it. That is not a species testing whether music might be worth a shot. That is a species for whom music is already so central, it's worth a precious hunk of ivory, and a week of skilled labor to make a slightly better one. And it isn't two flutes. It's a scatter of them, bone and ivory both, across several caves in the same corner of southern Germany. And then, later, thinner echoes of the same idea turning up hundreds of miles away in France and Austria. One extraordinary flute could be a fluke, a lone genius, a lucky survival. A whole cluster of them, worked in different materials by different hands across a wide stretch of land and time, is a tradition. And traditions don't appear out of nowhere. They have long, invisible childhoods. Which brings us back to the instrument you can't excavate. The voice leaves almost nothing behind. No wood, no string, no carved bone. Just that single hyoid. And even that only tells you the throat was capable, not what came out of it. This is the whole frustration of the question in one sentence. The oldest, most universal, most obvious instrument in human history is also the one that fossilizes worst. We are trying to date the invention of singing using a body part that turns up maybe once every few tens of thousands of years. There's an honest fight among researchers about how much that Kabara bone really proves. A hyoid that looks the same doesn't guarantee it was used the same way. A pig has a hyoid too, and pigs aren't known for their ballads. But a team led by Stephen Rowe at the University of New England put the Neanderthal bone through detailed biomechanical modeling in 2013, looking past its shape at its internal structure, the microscopic architecture that only forms in response to how a bone actually gets used. Their read was that it wasn't just built like ours, it was used like ours. Whether that adds up to full speech is still argued hard. But singing asks less of a throat than speech does. You don't need grammar to hold a note. And controlled, pitched sound was plainly within its range. There's a bone that pushes this even harder if it holds up. In a cave called Divja Babe in Slovenia, someone found a piece of a young cave bear's thigh bone with 2 clean holes punched in a line, and it's somewhere around 60,000 years old, which would make it Neanderthal, not human. Ivan Turk, the archaeologist who studied it, argued it was a flute. If he's right, Neanderthals weren't just built to sing. They were building instruments. I have to be straight with you here, because this one is genuinely contested. Plenty of researchers looked at those holes and saw something a lot less romantic. The bite marks of a carnivore. A hyena, another cave bear, whose teeth happened to punch through bone at roughly the spacing of finger holes. The bone might be a flute. It might be somebody's leftovers. The experts don't agree, and I'm not going to pretend they do. But notice what happens even if you throw it out completely, call it a hyena's dinner, and move on. The hyoid is still sitting there in Kabara. The throat was still ready. The capacity for song doesn't hang on that one disputed bone, and it doesn't stop at the border of our species. Whatever music was, we may have shared it with a cousin who isn't around anymore to hum along. An archaeologist named Stephen Mithen took that thread about as far as it goes. He argued that Neanderthals may have communicated through something that was neither speech nor music the way we'd separate them today, but a single blurred thing from before that line got drawn. Meaning and feeling carried on melody and rhythm alone, no grammar required. It's a big claim. It's speculative, and he'd be the first to say so. But it circles the same uncomfortable, wonderful possibility that the split between talking and singing came late, and that for a long stretch, our ancestors and theirs may have done both at once without ever knowing there was a difference to notice. Step back from the bones for a second and look at living humans, because they leave a clue the dirt can't. There is no human culture without music. None. Anthropologists have gone hunting for an exception. Every documented society, on every continent, in every climate, and every degree of isolation, makes music. That's a shorter list than you'd expect, because plenty of things we assume are universal turn out not to be. Music is. And a trait that shows up in every branch of humanity, no matter how long those branches have been separated, is almost always a trait that was already there before they split. Old, deep, load-bearing. And it turns up first in every single human life. Before you could speak, someone sang to you. Every culture on Earth does this. The specific, sing-song, exaggerated little melody adults slide into around a baby. The one you've heard 100 strangers use without anyone ever teaching it to them. Infants respond to it before they understand a single word, locking onto the tune, settling, or brightening to the melody long before language means anything at all. Charles Darwin noticed this direction of travel more than a century ago and guessed that song came before speech, that we were singing to each other, courting and soothing and bonding through melody before we were ever talking. The order in a baby's life quietly agrees with him. The tune lands first. The words show up late. The throat was ready. The flutes were already masterpieces. And still, none of it explains why. Why would a species pour this much into organized sound in the first place? Singing doesn't sharpen a spear or start a fire. On the face of it, it's a whole lot of energy spent making noise. Robin Dunbar, an evolutionary psychologist at Oxford, has spent years on an answer that reframes the entire question. Other primates hold their groups together by grooming, literally picking through each other's fur, one-on-one, which triggers a release of endorphins in the brain and builds the trust that keeps a group from tearing itself apart. It works beautifully. It also does not scale. You can only groom one friend at a time, and there are only so many hours in a day, which puts a hard ceiling on how big a bonded group can get. Music smashes that ceiling. When people sing together, move together, drum together in sync, their brains release the same endorphins grooming does, except a song works on 20 people at once, or 200. Dunbar studies found that group singing raises people's pain thresholds, which is a reliable fingerprint of that endorphin flood, and that the effect gets stronger the more voices join in. Singing in this picture is grooming that scales. It's how humans learned to bond in numbers no ape can manage. A whole camp, a whole tribe, held together by nothing but sound made in time. Think of a stadium of strangers roaring the same anthem. That hair-lifting thing that happens in your chest when a room full of people you've never met all hit the chorus at once. That's not a metaphor for connection. That's the mechanism firing, live, in real time. Even birds get the same neurochemical hit from singing in a group. This isn't decoration on top of human life. It's part of the machinery that let large groups of humans exist at all. And if that's what music is for, it can't be young. The problem it solves: how do you keep more people bonded than you could ever physically touch? Is one our ancestors were already running into long before anyone carved a flute, back when group sizes first started outgrowing what one-on-one grooming could hold together. Run the logic backward, and the bonding power of song has to be old enough to have been solving that problem for a very, very long time. The flute, once again, is late to its own party. There's one more piece, and it's the strangest of all. It takes us back into the dark. Go back to that cave from the very beginning. The total black, the crawl through cold stone, For a long time, everyone assumed the paintings deep inside those caves, the horses and bison and red handprints, ended up wherever the wall happened to be smooth and reachable. In the 1980s, a musicologist named Igor Reznikov, working with Michel Dauvois, decided to test something almost nobody had thought to ask. He went through French-painted caves, Nio, Le Portel, Arcy-sur-Cure, and instead of looking, he sang. He moved through the darkness making sounds, mapping where his voice rang out and boomed and multiplied on itself, and where it just fell dead against the rock. Then he laid his map of the loud spots over the map of where the paintings were. They matched, overwhelmingly. At some of those caves, he estimated that 80 to 90% of the images sat in the most resonant locations. The exact places where a human voice comes alive. Where the acoustics went flat, the walls were mostly bare. And at a couple of the single loudest points, where the echo peaks hardest, there's no animal painted at all. Just a few red dots, marking the spot like a signature. This one's debated too, and it should be. You're trying to measure a whim from 40,000 years ago, with your own voice and a wristwatch, and a later study with better equipment complicated some of the findings. But the core pattern keeps resurfacing. And if it's real, it rewrites what those caves even were. They weren't galleries. They were instruments. People didn't crawl 100 feet into a screaming dark tunnel to paint a horse where no one would ever see it. They went down there to make sound in the one place on Earth that made their voices enormous, and they marked the resonance with paint in the deepest, most dangerous, most sacred rooms they had. The painting and the singing were the same act. The cave sang back. Here's the part I can't shake. There is, statistically, a song stuck in your head right now. Or there was earlier today, or there will be within the hour. Some fragment on a loop that you didn't choose, didn't summon, and can't fully switch off. You hum in the shower without deciding to. You tap the rhythm on the steering wheel before you notice you're doing it. Drop you into a crowd of strangers and start a song everyone knows, and something in your chest answers before your brain gets a vote. You didn't pick that up the way you learned to read. It runs underneath you, automatic, closer to breathing, because it's the same equipment that Neanderthal in Kabara was carrying 60,000 years ago. The same throat. The same wiring that floods your brain with warmth when you sing alongside other people. The tune you can't shake is running on anatomy older than your species. That's what the flutes were pointing at the whole time. Not the invention of music. Proof that by 40,000 years ago, it was already ancient, already central, already the thing worth splitting a mammoth's tusk over. So when you catch yourself humming for no reason at all, that's the oldest thing you do. You are doing, without one conscious thought, exactly what someone was doing in the resonant dark of a French cave before anybody had a word for any of it. The music didn't start with them. It didn't start with us. It was already playing when we got here, and we have never once managed to stop. Maybe that's the thing to sit with, that the most involuntary, background, forgettable thing you do all day turns out to be one of the oldest and strangest things any human has ever done. I'll leave you with this. What's the first song you remember loving, not understanding, just loving, before you knew what a single word of it meant? Drop it down in the comments. I've got a feeling the answers run older than they look.